Yeah, man, you know what it is, man. I go by the name No Joke, the producer, and we are going to talk about equalization. Now, what is an equalization? Equalization is the process of adjusting a specific frequency on a sound. Now, the audible frequency spectrum ranges from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, and frequency each unit is hertz. So, anytime you see HZ on a plugin or on a hardware, they are referring to frequency. And why do we use an equalizer in music production? Now, we use an equalizer in music production to first of all remove problematic frequencies, the frequencies we probably don't like, the frequencies we think might create problem, the frequencies we think is not really right, it's not sounding well. We use an equalizer to achieve that purpose. And also we use an equalizer to shape a sound, to create a tone we want. We also use an equalizer to create special effects as well. We also use an equalizer to enhance, to create clarity, to give presence to a sound. These are the reasons why we use an equalizer. Now let's look at the types of an equalizer. We have the parametric equalizer, semi-parametric, dynamic, shaving, and graphic equalizer. Now let's look at the types of filters when it comes to equalizer. We have the low pass and the high pass filter. We have the high chef and the low chef. We also have the peak, the bell as well. So without wasting much of your time, let's hit into our digital audio workstation. Let me demonstrate how an EQ works. It is what it is, man. So let's go. Finally, we are inside our digital audio workstation, and let's look at the types of equalizers. Now we have the parametric equalizer. So let me demonstrate. So this is what we call the parametric equalizer. And what it means is you can stand on any point. As we've said earlier, that the audible frequency spectrum range starts from 20 to 20,000 hertz, which means you can stand on any frequency and do either your cutting or your boosting. With the parametric EQ, you can stand on any frequency to either do your cutting or your boosting. That's what it means, the parametric EQ. Let me also bring this plugin, Fab Filter Q. So with the parametric EQ. Now let's look at the parameters on the parametric EQ. It's quick one. So we have the frequency. So the frequency, this is the straight line is the frequency. We start from the 20 to 20,000. Now, and we have what we call the Q or the resonance. So the resonance will determines the bandwidth. It determines if it needs to be broad or it needs to be narrow. So if, let's say, for instance, so this is what we call the Q or the resonance. So we can either adjust the Q by making it more broad or making it more narrow. So that's how it looks like. And also we have what we call the gain. So the gain is how much you wants to boost or how much you probably wants to cut. So this is the frequency. This is the frequency. And so let's talk about the slope also. We have what we call the slope. So let's say, for instance, we are doing a low cut. We can probably determine the steepness. Either we want to remove everything. So it determines the steepness. Look at what is happening, becoming a straight line. So the higher it goes, the higher the steepness it becomes. So this one's, so this determines the steepness. If, for instance, we know we want to remove everything, let's say from 100 hertz, want to clear everything completely, then we need to make sure we are using a high slope. Hope you understand what I'm saying. Now, let's also move to semi-parametric EQ. So let me close this one. Let's move to semi-parametric EQ. Now, this is what we call the semi-parametric EQ. So the semi-parametric EQ is where everything, the plugin has already adjusted its frequencies and it's having the options where you can tweak around. Either you want to make the Q narrow or you want to make the Q broad. So let's say, for instance, this frequency. So it gives you a ranges of frequency. It gives you a ranges of frequency where you can either boost it or cut it or reduce it. So this is the Q band. Unlike the other one where you can swing around on any other frequencies, this one is already, it's more or less like preset of frequencies for you. So either you can go to that exact point and increase the bandwidth, which is the Q, or narrow it, or depends on your preference and or what you want to do with it. So this is how the semi-parametric EQ looks like. But with the parametric EQ, you have total control over the frequency. Even though this, you still have total control over the frequency, but just that it comes with a little bit limitations. So that's how it looks like. This is what we call the semi-parametric EQ. And also let's look at okay, this is also a semi-parametric EQ. So everything is configured already. So you just be on the bandwidth and you can probably increase it or decrease it like the way it is, everything the way it is. So this is what we call the semi-parametric EQ. Now let's move to graphic EQ. Now this is what we call the graphic EQ. So if you can remember back in most of these old tapes or most of these equalizers have this kind of fader where all the bands of frequency where you can either increase or decrease, it comes with all the frequency bands where you can either increase or decrease. This is what we call the graphic equalizer. So this is what we call the graphic equalizer. So you can either increase or decrease. So once you understand what this does, all it means is when you are doing your music production, you know the right equalizer to choose for the right job. So this is what we call the graphic equalizer. Let me bring another one also. This is what we also call the graphic equalizer. So it comes with a bandwidth with volume faders. So when you look at most of these old classic tapes, it even has these equalizers where you can either increase it or reduce it, either boost it or reduce it. So this comes the volume fader of each band of frequencies. Hope you understand what I'm saying. So that's how it looks like. So now let's move to dynamic EQ. I think this is one of the important topics. Now with dynamic EQ, let me put this one on default. Dynamic EQ. So this is what it means. Dynamic EQ, instead of the parametric, or let me say the semi-parametric where everything is static, with the dynamic EQ, it's non-static, which means if, let's say for instance, parametric EQ, you get to, let me say you've boosted 2 dB or you've cut 2 dB. It's just going to be like that throughout. But with the dynamic EQ, it has the function of a compression. You can set it in such a way that based on the compression, the volume reduce or the volume increase is not just going to be that volume set, but it's going to work like the way compression works, where the ratio comes into play, the attack, the release. So it's just going to work like, and most times we use this EQs to probably, let me say, if it's a surgical problem you are fixing, let me say you are de-essing and or something, and you feel you don't want to just take it off just like this. So maybe you feel you just want, I'm just demonstrating some of the techniques I use dynamic EQ to do. You just don't want to reduce it by 3D, but you feel anytime a peak crosses a certain threshold, you want it to be reduced, you can use the dynamic EQ to achieve that purpose. I'm using that example so that you get to understand. Unlike parametric EQ, where when you set it, it's just like that. Whether the peaks go up, whether the peaks come down, it's still reducing 2 dB or 3 dB, let me say 3 dB. But with the dynamic EQ, it only acts when the peak crosses the threshold. And based on your ratio settings and your attack settings, then it will react. So that's what dynamic EQ means. So with those, dynamic EQs are not static. They are not just there, like 2 dB gain reduction. No, dynamic EQs are more of an EQ which works like a multi-band compression. That's what dynamic EQ means. Now let's move on to another type of EQ, which is the shaving. the shelving. So with the shelving type of EQ equalizer, let me bring this EQ. So this is plugin alliance dangerous bass EQ. So these are more of either increasing the lows or decreasing the lows. They are more of a shelf, either increasing the lows or increasing the lows, and also or either increasing the highs and also decreasing the highs. They are more of a shelf where you are either increasing or decreasing. And some of these plugins also do have mid-range and all of that, where you are either increasing or decreasing. So it comes with more of a straight line where if you raise, you are starting at a certain frequency, and you probably let me use the fab filter. I don't want to confuse you, but let me use the fab filter to explain how the shelving works. So with the shelving, all it just means is, so it's, let's say for instance, I put this one on, let me say low shelf. That's what it's just doing. That's what we call the shelving EQ, the shelving equalizer. It's the same as this very one. I'm just using this one for teaching purpose, so that you get to understand what I mean. So, or let me see, high shelf. We see what's happening. So that's what we mean by the shelving equalizer. So you just want to raise the stand on a certain frequency to raise either the volume or to cut the volume. So that's what it means. So now let's move to the type of filters. This is very important. Let's move to the types of filters. I'm going to use the fab filter to do those demonstrations. So when it comes to the type of filters, let's talk about the low shelf and the high shelf. Now when we say low shelf, what it just means is you standing on a frequency where you the frequency you stand on, either you want to everything below, you want to either increase or decrease. So this is what we call the low shelf, and this is what we call the low shelf, either increasing or decreasing. So you stand on a frequency, and everything below that frequency, you get to either increase or decrease. So that's what we call the low shelf. The same as high shelf. Now with the high shelf, we are talking about the types of filters now. With the high shelf, so this is what the high shelf means. So this is, so either increasing. So this one, high shelf, means from the frequency you stand on, everything above that frequency, you get to either increase or decrease. And that's what we call the high shelf. That's how it looks like. Okay. So now let's move on to bell. So let me see, bell. Okay, so with the bell, this is what bell looks like. This is what the bell looks like. It looks like the real shape of a bell itself. This is what it looks like. So this is what the bell looks like, where you can adjust it. I've already taught you where you can adjust using the Q. The Q determines the bandwidth. Either we want it to be narrow or broad. This is what the bell looks like. And also let's look at the high pass filter. Okay, so let me put this one in default. So let's look at the now. So when you see a low cut, it just means either a low cut or a high pass filter. So what it just means is, what someone asked them, what's the difference between the low shelf, if let's say for instance we are decreasing, or let me say, now someone asks what is the difference between the low shelf and the high pass filter, or let me say low cut. The difference is very simple. With the low shelf, still you have some of the sound still playing, even though you still reduce it, you have some of the sound still coming through. But when you use the low cut or the high pass filter, what it means is it's going to roll off everything. So let's say for instance we increase the steep. What is happening over all this portion, everything is being rolled off in such a way that nothing is going to play from that from this session. Nothing is going to play from this session. So that's what we use the high pass filter or the low cut to achieve. Now let's move on to the low pass filter or high cut. So let me put this one on default so that it wouldn't confuse you guys. So this is what we mean if we say high cut or low pass filter. What it means is it's going to roll off everything from the frequency you are standing on the highs. It's going to make sure everything is being rolled off, and this is what we call the low pass filter or the high cut. So the low pass filter or the high cut, this is what we term as the low pass filter or the high cut. So let me put this one on default. Quick one. Let's move to the next one. We've already talked about the bell, Now let's see which one we've not talked about. Now let's talk about the band pass. Now the band pass is the range of frequency you probably wants to play, which means everything. So we can still use the Q to either increase the bandwidth, and we can use the slope also to determine how steep we want our curve to be. Now, so the bandwidth is the portion we probably can use to determine. So it means any sound is not going to play from this section the same as this section. The sound is only going to come out from this section, as in the band. So this is what we call the band pass. So this is what we call the band pass. We can choose the frequency we probably want to. We can use the EQ to adjust the bandwidth. Okay, so let's talk about the notch, where notch only talks about more of reduction. So let's say the reduction, and so this is what we call the notch filter. So let me reduce it, and probably I want to bring it to, so this is what we call the notch filter. This filter is only to remove. It's more of a surgical EQ where you want to probably take off. So this is what we call the notch filter. So that will be all for an equalization, as we've gone through all the topics from types of equalizers, the filters, the parameters, what equalizer does. It is what it is, man. Kindly share with us your thoughts when it comes to equalization, and also don't forget to subscribe to our channels. Boom.